We've been going through a series titled Upside Down, Money and Other Short Stories. And it is my prayer, if you've been here throughout the month of October, is that there's transformation that is happening in your area of finances. Our desire is that we are not just being transformed and getting connected with God, but our desire is that we are thriving in every area, every realm of our lives. So today, I want to talk about giving. And giving, especially in the context of this church. Now, don't even think about other churches out there. I want to talk about us who are here at Mavuno Downtown. But let me start with a question. I want to start with a question, and I want you to indulge me and even indulge the people around you. Imagine with me that I had unlimited resources, and I gave you a blank check. My two questions are, what amount will you write on that blank check, and why? Imagine I have unlimited resources. Name the amount. I have it. I got it. I got you. What will you write on that blank check and why? Here's the thing, guys. There's actually a man in the Bible who this happened to him. You know, and the magnificent thing about his story is not a random guy who showed up like me and said, here's a blank check, I have unlimited resources, here you can write any number that you need. It's actually our Almighty God who appeared before him and offered him what we can consider strongly as a blank check. I'm talking about none other than King Solomon. Now, many of us are familiar with King Solomon because King Solomon is known as the wealthiest man who ever lived. I mean, when you think about the current wealthiest man who lives right now, that is Jeff Bezos, he makes Jeff Bezos' money look like pocket change. That's how wealthy. Right now, Jeff Bezos is about $110 billion. That's how much he's worth. But he makes Jeff Bezos' money look like pocket change. It's like for one of those departments in the palace. You know, those ones for maybe paying the workers or one of those things. Like, that's how this guy was he was uncommonly rich. That's what King Solomon was. Like, when you try and even account, in fact, scholars have tried to account at how much wealth this guy had. No one can be able to comprehend the amount of wealth that this guy had. I'm going to prove why it continues to be said that this guy is the wealthiest man who ever lived. And he wasn't just the wealthiest man, he was also a teacher. And we find that he wrote several books. And 3 of his books actually made it to the Bible. This is Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. That's what King Solomon has written. Now, I want to take us back to the book of 2 Chronicles, chapter 1, because 2 Chronicles, this is where we find the story of King Solomon when he begins his reign. His father, King David, has left off the reins, you know, and now he is the one who's taking over from him. So 2 Chronicles chapter 1 and verse 7, when you jump to verse 7, we find that night God appeared to Solomon and said, "What do you want? Ask, and I will give it to you." How many of us want God to show up right now and just ask you that question? How many of us know what you want? Okay? You are clear on what you want. Okay? Now, here is the thing. God appears to Solomon and he's like, ask, first of all, it's like, what do you want? What do you want? That's just the openness and how God just responds to him. He's like, what do you want? Ask, and I will give it to you. Guys, can you imagine the Almighty God, the all-powerful, who created heaven and earth, appearing before you and saying, ask for anything you want and I shall give it to you. And I had to stop myself and ask, why Solomon? Why would God appear to Solomon? Because this guy, according to me, he didn't need it. He didn't need all this kind of favor that God had accorded to him because he would have asked for anything that would have advanced him. Why didn't God appear to a random poor Israelite who will probably benefit with such a favor or with such a blessing? Why would God do this to Solomon? Is this the case of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer? You know, and many of us, we are familiar with this kind of story because you look around you and all you see is people, every other person, every other individual close to you is getting blessed. But you have to claw and you have to fight for your blessings. You've been praying and fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, but somehow your blessings are not coming through. And then God randomly appears to King Solomon and is like, ask for what you want and I shall give it to you. How many of us sometimes feel like God is just appearing to any other friend of yours apart from you, and He's not blessing you? And I had to ask myself, there has to be something different about this that drew God to King Solomon. And to my surprise, when you go up a few verses, you find the incident that happened that somehow brought God to King Solomon's attention. Let's go back to verse 1 of 2 Chronicles chapter 1. And this is what we are told. Solomon, son of David, took firm control of his kingdom. For the Lord his God was with him and made him very powerful. And Solomon called together all the leaders of Israel, the generals, the captains of the army, the judges, and all the political and clan leaders. And I love this about Solomon because the thing is this, even as leaders, the very first thing that Solomon does as soon as he's designated as the king is that he gathers all his leaders and they go to a place of worship. In fact, when you read the next verse, you'll find that, yes, they go into this place where the Lord's presence was, and they go and worship. Then he led the entire assembly to the place of worship in Gibeon, for God's tabernacle was located there. I want us to jump to verse 5, I think. That goes there in front, verse 6. There in front of the tabernacle, Solomon went up to the bronze altar in the Lord's presence and sacrificed what? Sacrificed what? 1,000 burnt offerings. Now, guys, think about it for a while. Think about it, because when you read this story, Solomon started by worshiping God. But he didn't just worship and consult God. And here's the kicker for me. He went with this, what was considered unusual offering, because there was no precedence. What this guy did, giving this 1,000 burnt offerings, this was ridiculous. It was amazing for us. And he gave it out of his own volition, not because he was asked by God, not because he was instructed by God. He gave it out of his own volition. And just do the math for yourself. How many people would you need to burn or sacrifice 1,000 animals? How many people will you need? What kind of fuel? Just even think about the operational logistic. It will be a nightmare for you to be able to do something like this. But Solomon gives everything towards this. It's like God shows up and he's like, Solomon, all this for me. You must love me. You must be very concerned about me. Tell me what you want, and I'll give it to you. Tell me what you want, and I'll give it to you. This is the point that I'm trying to drive towards in this message. How you give reveals the state of your heart. How you and I give reveals the state of our heart. How we interact with money, how we give reveals the state of our heart. The amazing sacrifice from King Solomon revealed the state of his heart toward God. It is about the state of your heart when it comes to money. Because when you look at the story of Solomon, Solomon loved God so much that it did not matter to him how much he gave God. What mattered to him was that he honored God with what he had. The posture of his heart was more important toward God than the size of his offering. But get this, because I don't want you to miss this. It was the posture of his heart that led him to give over and above and beyond what was considered as regular offering. And because of that, God chose to work in him and through him to do great and mighty things. The posture of Solomon's heart towards God. So what was the posture that he had, you ask? Well, verse 8. And it is interesting that we come to find out about the posture of his heart. And this just shows that God can be able to see even through our hearts. Because we learn about the posture of Solomon's heart when we read on in verse 8. And verse 8 says this: Solomon replied to God, "You showed great and faithful love to David my father, and now you have made me king in his place. O Lord God, please continue to keep your promise to David my father." Because there was a promise that God had already given to his father about just how the kingdom will continue and the reign will continue through this lineage. "For you have made me king over a people as numerous as the dust of the earth." And then I look at what the prayer that he makes, his response to God from verse 7, about what do you want. He says, "Give me the wisdom and the knowledge to lead them properly. For who could possibly govern this great people of yours?" His heart, Solomon's heart, was for God's people. Solomon chose spiritual blessings over temporal blessings. And based on Solomon's choices, in fact, in what he asked God to give him, look at how God responds. I love this response. God says this in verse 11, because your greatest desire is to help your people, and you did not ask for wealth. You did not ask for riches. Solomon, you did not ask for fame or even the death of your enemies, but rather you've asked for wisdom. You've asked for knowledge to properly govern my people. Just hold on there for a minute. For me, go back to the verse. For me, the thing that I love about this is that God is almost saying that, Solomon, you had the opportunity to ask for wealth. You could have asked for riches. You could have asked for fame. You even had the opportunity to ask for the death of your enemies. God says, I will certainly give you the wisdom and knowledge you requested, because Solomon is also known as one of the wisest men who ever lived. But I will also, here's a bonus. You've asked for ability, for wisdom and knowledge to govern my people. I will slap you with a bonus. I will give you wealth. I will give you riches. I will give you fame such as no other king has had before you and will ever have in the future. That is why Solomon is known as the wealthiest man who ever lived. Many of us, we know and we've asked God, we prayed, we would love for God to bless us, and we even have the words for it: exceedingly, abundantly, above all that you can ever think, wish, or even imagine, and we even add our own words in there. But when you look at the state of your heart, it reveals to us that you're so far from God. James 4 verse 3 says this: when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on what? On what? And could it be that many of the times that we are asking, but we are asking with the wrong motive because we are only focusing on ourselves? And here King Solomon is teaching us that, yes, how awesome it is for me to do the thing that you have called me to do and you've called my family to do. God blessed Solomon so much so because he knew it didn't matter how much I give Solomon. God knew it doesn't matter how much I give Solomon. I know that he will use it for the godly thing. This is what I want to say. The issue about tithing and giving is not a church issue. It's a heart issue. When you think about it, part of the reason why you struggle with why you give in church or why you should give in church, it is not because of the state of the church. And here, when I talk about churches, even here at Mavuno Downtown, but it's because of the state of your heart. If you interrogate and ask yourself the fundamental question, the critical question, you will find that at the core of that is that you have issues in your relationship with God. There are question marks. There are red flags here and there that we need. The issue about tithing and giving is not an issue of the church. It's a heart issue. Solomon's giving was driven by a love for God, not because he was forced to. It's not because he was told to do it. No. Solomon gave because he understood that it is God who blessed him. He understood that it is God who loves him and who cares for him, and he knew that God is a provider. Therefore, he had absolutely no hesitation in honoring God with what he had. How you give reveals the state of your heart. There's something that you have that if you give to God, heaven will come to a standstill. There's something that you have that God has blessed you with that if you give, heaven will come to a standstill. And here's the thing for us. We need to remember, because here's the context of the conversation. Solomon gives of these 1,000 burnt offerings at the beginning of his reign. So in actual sense, in comparison to where God was taking him, the kind of wealth that God was about to hook him up with, at this point, Solomon had nothing. The riches, the wealth that God was about to hook him up with, at this point, Solomon giving of the 1,000 burnt offerings, he gave it from a place of nothing compared to what God was doing for him. It's not about when you have more. It's about what you can do or what more can you do with what you have? It reminds me of the story of the widow in Mark chapter 12 from verse 41. And this is what it says. If you can just put that up for me. Jesus sat down near the collection box in the temple and watched as the crowds dropped in their money. Many rich people put in large amounts. Then a poor widow came and dropped in 2 small coins. And then Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I tell you the truth. This poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions. Why? For they gave a tiny part of their surplus, but she, poor as she is, has given everything she had to live on. It is about the state of your heart, not the size of the offering. If you're finding it difficult right now to give God, you'll probably find it 10 times difficult when you have wealth. Some of us, the way we give is spontaneous giving. Where you come to a place like this and the pastor is talking about spread the love and how you're going to give to the children at State House Primary, and you give towards that and you celebrate yourself. Or you walk out of here and there's someone who has a need. Maybe they haven't paid their rent, they haven't eaten food, and you give them 200 shillings, 500 shillings. Maybe you walk out and maybe there's street children across the street. Maybe it's even a children's home. And you give spontaneously and you feel good about yourself. Then there are those of us who give sporadically. For you, it's you'll give this month, but then things will happen, life will happen, and then maybe the next time you'll give is January, or you'll celebrate your family, or you give to your family this month, and then the next time you give is probably in June next year. But then there are those of us who also give just sparingly, where you fork out 100 shillings here, you fork out another 500 shillings here, where we're like, I don't know whether I can be able to give this. But unfortunately, that has absolutely no impact. You're not even able to make an impact to anyone's life. Even in your family, you give sparingly, and it's not even helping anyone because it's not even thought through. This kind of giving, it's not all bad. I'm not saying that now stop. But the thing that I'm trying to drive us toward is that it is not different from those who don't believe God. There's absolutely no way why you and I, who are followers of Jesus, people who believe that God is the ultimate provider, that if you're here and you believe that God is the owner, God is the creator of heaven and earth, if you're here and you believe that God is the provider, not even believing in God, but believing that God is the one who provides for you, then this is not the kind of giving that we should be giving. The first thing that I want you to do is learn how to prioritize your giving to God. Your first giving to God should be the first thing on your list. You see, many of us, we have a saving plan, we have an investment plan, we have a get out of debt plan, but we don't have a giving plan. Even when you have that pending bill, when it's just annoying and it will come in and it will suck your money out, you know very well that immediately you need to pay or you need to give of your tithes and offering, which leads me to the next thing, which is percentage giving. Now, I use this percentage because it's famously known as, we talk about it as tithing. We talk about tithing, but there is a reason why I'm using percentage giving. But what percentage giving or tithing means is that you've pre-decided how much you want to give beforehand. The challenge that sometimes we have is that we are waiting on God to only bless us in monetary terms. That God, if I give you, what I want you to do is give me this number of billions and millions or thousands of shillings so that I can be able to do this. Not knowing that God is blessing you through even other people. Some of us, even in our marriage, we may not have the money that we needed. We may not have the house or the car that we have, but you're in a healthy and happy space and you're enjoying each other's company and you know what God is doing. These things, He's blessing you. And it's not even just about the money. It's about what is the state of your heart so that when God entrusts you with this income, He can be able to do way more than even what you have. The thing about tithing also is that we're inviting God to take control. Because when I give away of that 1,000 shilling, what I'm saying to God is that, you know what? I'm not in control of this. Because in my own human mind, my own logic, it doesn't even make sense. It is not even enough. And God, I'm inviting you to be in control of my situation, to invite you to be in control of my finances. The last thing that I want to talk about is progressive giving. How do we tune our hearts? Prioritize your giving. Percentage. Give a percentage of your income, and then progressive. Don't just give what you were giving 5 years ago. Many of us, God has blessed us exceedingly abundantly. Some of us, the amount that is equivalent to your 10% right now was what you were earning 5 years ago, gross. And God has blessed you greatly. And you've continued to remain in that space. You've continued to give the same way you were giving 5 or 10 years ago. Don't remain in that space. But I also realize that for some people, it's the opposite. The script has flipped. And for you, 5 years ago, you were at a place where you had an income. Now you probably don't have an income. And I understand that for you, even giving of the 10% is absolutely a sacrifice. Because you're like, God, I can't even give you this 500 shillings or this 100 shillings because that is milk for the children. I don't even know what we're going to get tomorrow, and I understand. But then, the other side of the divide, some of us, giving of your 10% is not even generous. Because God has given you so much, and I'm saying it in the nicest way possible, because God has blessed you that even when you look at the 90%, God is like, you can even live on 30% of your income and you will still be amongst the top earning people. But you still continue giving the same way that you were giving before. So we jump to chapter 7, and this is what I love also about Solomon, is that he looked for the best of the best for God. And when you go to chapter 7, this is what it says. When Solomon finished praying, fire flashed down from heaven and burnt up the burnt offerings and sacrifices, and the glorious presence of the Lord filled the temple. Now I want you to note, go back to verse 1. I want you to note something there, that fire came down and burnt up the burnt offerings. Now go to verse 2. It says that the priests could not enter the temple of the Lord because the glorious presence of the Lord filled it. When all the people of Israel saw the fire coming down and the glorious presence of the Lord filling the temple, they fell face down, because every time you come in or before God's presence, you can only worship Him. It is so glorious. It is so magnificent. You can't even stand and face God. And it filled the temple. They fell face down on the ground and worship and praise the Lord, saying, He is good. His faithful love endures forever. Then the king and all the people offered sacrifices to the Lord. And then check this out. What happened next? King Solomon offered what? Of what? Say it together with me. And so the king and all the people dedicated the temple to the Lord. Solomon sacrificed 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep and goats. It had to disturb the earth before it disturbed heaven. That, you remember verse 1? The glory of the Lord, fire flashed from heaven and it came down and consumed the burnt offerings. That as God continued to bless Solomon, he continued to give. He started with 1,000 burnt offerings. But somehow he's gotten to the place where he's not just giving 1,000. Do the math. 100 and what? 42,000 that he gives to the Lord and he sacrifices to the Lord. And it's like God, the more he continues to give, the more God continues to bless him. And that's what I'm talking about, progressive giving. Guys, how many days did it take the people to prepare this? All this kind of animal. This operation is mind-boggling. But then even over and above that, Solomon, when you read the chapters in between chapter 1 to chapter 7, you will find that Solomon was very keen in ensuring that only the best goes into the temple of God. And it was because of that that God finally saw that, yes, now he came and he consumed the burnt offerings. How you give reveals the state of your heart. The agenda here is not trying to get you to give more so that the church can celebrate and say we have more offering. My agenda in this place today is such that your heart can be tuned towards God. The posture of your heart will be right placed so that when you give, when it comes to giving, it ceases to become about the figure that you're giving and it becomes about the one that you love. Because all of us know that when you love someone deeply, it is not about how much you're spending on them. It is about what that makes them feel. And Solomon here, he knew that what will make my God proud and happy and joyful, what will tug at my God's heart will be if I give him the best. What is the best? That is why here at Mavuno we talk about worshiping God with our giving. Because we want to create a habit where we are worshiping God and we come. It is not about an obligation. That's why I talked about percentage giving. Because some of us, God is asking you, it is not about the percentage. Don't be limited to that. God is like, I want to bless you with even more. But I want to make sure that your heart is in the right place. It is not about that. I don't need your money. I'm the one who was provided for you. And what I want in this space now is that your heart is aligned to me. That your heart is at the place where I want it to be. And money being the competition in your heart with God. God is saying you need to relinquish control of this. You need to learn how to prioritize me over the money. You need to learn how to consistently remind yourself that I am your provider. And even as you grow in your giving, you're telling yourself that, God, I am growing in my giving because even as you bless me, it is not the money that takes care of me. It is you who takes care of me. That needs to happen because sometimes our incomes grow and we get comfortable and we think that, oh, it's my gifting, it's my money that takes care of me. But God is like, no, even your giving needs to grow because you need to stop thinking that it's your money that is taking care of you. But it is me who's taking care of you. Guys, when you prioritize your giving, when you give a percentage of your income, decide what your percentage of your income is. And then thirdly, if you begin to understand that, yes, God is calling you to progressive giving, then you are setting and tuning the posture of your heart towards God. I want to say that the journey to your godly riches starts here. It starts here. It starts here.